Yo, I'm Zander Tsadwa, one man Sherrard, and I'm on the chopping block at visceralchange.org. Yeah, full name Alexander Tsadwa. I always start with who my parents are because the background kind of sets up who I am, right? So my parents are both Ethiopian immigrants, and they got here 91. I came around 3 years later, and I was actually born, and for the first 8 years of my life, I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So Ethiopian kid in Sioux Falls. I didn't tell you that, did I? When I first met you, I like to keep that back because I feel like it could color a perception until you get to know me. That being said, yeah, that being my start, especially as the first person in my family to be an American, it gave me like a blank canvas. Like it kind of kept me from race because I was African, so my parents ain't really that's not their history, you know. The diaspora, the slave trade, or just being in America is not in them. So it wasn't in my household. Then you go out, in the world, which to me, from 0 to 8 is Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's blank. It's non-existent. There is like race is like people and then me, right? So I didn't really grasp difference in that way for a while. And it wasn't my formative years, but it was like my first taste of what America was, right? I moved to St. Paul in 03, and that's proudly my hometown. Still in the Midwest, but I get to class, and my teacher introduces me to, other black kids because she thinks that's just the way to do it, or an Ethiopian kid. And then you start to see a difference. Then you start to see how different people put their expectations of the world onto you to make sense of you. And that's what humans do. But yeah, I finally figured out from then that white kids had a different way of looking at me, or wanting to look at me, or wanting me to be in order to affiliate. Multi-generational black folk had a different way of looking at me. I had a lot more in common and less to negotiate with first-generation kids, even if they weren't African, simply because they understood what that was. That overlap, or that living in that little Venn diagram of like, American and not, because you got to take on a lot of different things that your parents didn't, that no one in your family really has or needs to in order to have a sense of self if you want to be an American. I think that is the core of, I'd say, my cultural and racial identity. And since then, my life has just been like floating in and out of spaces, trying to be completely myself while understanding, the context I'm in. And that's always been interesting to me. Yeah, and that gets into my work because that's all I focus on. I want people that don't have as much power to tell their own stories to have space to tell them. I want them to translate it into ways that make, their narratives powerful institutionally, whether it's a homeless man in transition housing just wanting to explain, what it is about their situation that makes, like, I don't know, the lack of resources that, a transition housing organization will give someone instead of just like living space, what professional development looks like for a first generation homeless person or a black person versus a white homeless person. What being a first generation college student looks like versus a domestic college student who, despite being maybe a person of color, has been there, has had family there. Just picking out differences of the sort. A lot of intersection, yeah. Well, it starts personally, I've always had a fear of a number of things, but like the core fears I've had are of misunderstanding, um, being forgotten, and just not doing all that I can, right? I think when that comes to like narrative and identity, a lot of people don't get the chance to not just be who they are, but like have the space or opportunity to fully represent their perspective, their story, their selves. I think not only do people miss out on life when they're not able to, but the world misses out because it's impossible to have a complete perspective of what life is, of what humanity is, but every sentient being that comes into this world and just has a moment has a little sliver of something that no one else can get. And in society, that's really important. I really feel like being just a part of society broadly is like, it's a give and take. It's like understanding the difference between compromise with people and understanding like how people want to see you versus like giving in and not being yourself. And like a lot of people with marginalized identities don't have the freedom or the ability to like even make that negotiation, right? So the work I do now, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and a lot of that has to do with higher education. So the title "Facing a Bottle of Henny" is, well, first real life. That's something I'm doing. I did in college. That's something a lot of my friends did. I thought it was a fun yet dynamic metaphor for what the college experience is for a lot of first generation Americans, students of color, and then specifically Black students in American colleges. It's a bitter experience that if you persevere through, you can get something sweet from, or something, worthwhile from, like a shot of Henny or yak, And yak, I don't drink it like that, to be honest, but it's celebratory. I wanted to tell a story that gave a voice to, a marginalized perspective, but with a spin that wasn't so victimized, or I really do feel like there's value in all experiences, which is not to minimize pain or suffering or the struggles that people of various identities have just in living and existing. But I feel like there has been a space for a long time for youth of color to find the positives and the gains and the progress in being aware to everything that fucks us up, right? So I could have easily written about it could have just been a tirade or like a Jeremiad or a criticism of how a private Catholic school in an urban area secludes itself and keeps a kid like me who went to high school 10 minutes away from it, completely in the dark of its existence or what it had to offer. It could have been about, the fact that a school like that in my home recruited people who are not from where I am to come and get, a certain type of cultural capital, a certain level of connection, a certain level of validation that says, you're good here, or like, we know you're good. And like, we're looking specifically for you, YZ kid, legacy kid, upper middle class kid, even like rich international kid, right? It could have been, a shaking my fist at the world kind of story. But when you're in that kind of environment, again, and then as me, so first generation American college student, black kid from the city that this school is in. When you're in that kind of environment, there's a lot of onus on you to be sure of yourself and what you're doing there. Because you can easily bend to or just break to the expectations of you or what you think is being seen of you. So whether it's like he got in to fill a quota, or he's here but we're not going to reach out and help him out because we don't know, there aren't narratives like mine that just float around or exist or like have cohesion, or like there's no frame of reference to understand something like that I come from. And I wanted to write a book to give everyone a frame of reference. I wanted people like me to feel heard. I wanted a university to have a text, a legitimate text, and understand every aspect of that kind of student's experience. So when another class of me's comes into it, they're not floundering about thinking this is not their university or not their campus. Well, the more time I spent in college, I was very fortunate to be able to take advantage of some of the resources or experiences that, a place like that could offer. So, 2 campuses in 2 different cities in the Twin Cities. I was able to be back and forth. I was able to be in downtown Minneapolis and understand what the pace of life of people with money, with things to do, with urgency, because, they had spots like that in society. I got to understand what that was like. I got to understand what a higher up in an organization such as a university thought valuable. I got to understand how, again, a higher up at a university understood, a difficult experience or what value there was in an undertold story. I got to see all that, right? And there were flaws in, those lifestyles or those perspectives, but I don't know. In seeing that, I felt like I lived in a microcosm of just the greater world, at least the Western world, where I was eventually going to be as an adult. So as easily as it could have been, my first year was a very cynical year for me, attitude-wise. I was upset that I was there in the first place. I thought I was going to go to UChicago, or that was the closest school I even applied to before I applied to, a school in my my hometown. I was sending applications all over the place, one wait list, and then everything else was a denial except, my alma mater. So I was already upset that, the universe didn't allow me to just jump ship. I was upset that, I was around none of my peers from the very small reputation or glimpses of a reputation I got of this place. It didn't sound like a fit. And then after my first year, I realized to grow, I didn't need a fit. I needed a challenge. I like that you discussed Randall from This Is Us. I feel like on an individual level, it's like, yes, he, as a person has defeated, this stereotype, this paradigm, this expectation. So he's something else, right? And then when you take it on a macro level, it's like, that means as a collective, we still buy into blackness being a certain way, or black masculinity being a certain way. And if an individual can't fit that, can't be a part of it, because we'd rather have this intact than this person intact. So that's how I feel about to start my racial identity. It's like, okay, soft curly hair, especially when I first came in from Sioux Falls to St. Paul. I hadn't been around black people, or even many first generation African Americans. So like the way I developed my dialect had no hint of anything inner city for a little bit. I learned quick, and I'm glad I moved in my formative years, but like there wasn't anything there. Even just learning how to say it convincingly was like me trying to forge my own cultural capital for like a long time, right? So, and then what comes with that is a certain level of, I guess, defensiveness, just the understanding that your manhood, your respect, your sense of like, I don't know, comfort or vulnerability is always at some kind of risk, just being a black man. So like having your first impression or just engagement with a person being standoffish versus warm. So, like little things like that, I feel like built up my understanding of what, people largely, broadly, macro, thought black masculinity was. Trying to, and then this could go for like American culture too, but like trying to reach agreements or understandings versus riding with either or till the end of it. That being like loyalty or integrity versus trying to understand, a conflict or like resolving one or looking for peace instead of war. All those things. And then I guess to put it in simpler terms, like you could talk about heightened aggression, you could talk about hypersexuality, this, that, whatever. But just from my, my literary sense is like, there is always, you had to be more prone to conflict, to disagreeing with what people gave you, to compassion even, if you wanted to be considered like a respectable, and I guess within the black community, black man. Not to say that everyone wants that. I'm sure there are plenty of individuals that would watch this and say, that's not what I want out of a black man. Mm-hmm. But when I say these things, that you have to think about it collectively, because that's still true. We still share, or at least understand, this social map, this social cultural map, and we understand that that's still very much intact. That's not, that's not a fragmented region. It's not looking like South Sudan. It's still very much intact. I gotta jump around here, because in the same way I talk about how I had to like make a home out of St. Thomas, or in the same way I had to talk about making a home out of my alma mater, the same way I had to talk about making a home out of America. I've always just felt decentralized in that I've had to like go into different spaces and then pick out a core truth about that space or a person or a place, and then add it to who I am as a person. So I feel like it's a pretty beautiful mural that my character is. So I think first, I would say a number of teachers, K through 12, have really directed my attention to matters of the mind that have continued to be important to me. I think the most important, I can definitely run through every teacher I've had, in my childhood, but I'm gonna go to my senior high school teacher, senior English teacher, Miss King. I ain't gonna say her first name, but Miss King was the first person to show me how to like break down a text, right? We would read poems like Sylvia Plath and all these poets that you know by name but aren't really relevant to you.
Right.
Especially as a black kid, you're reading them, and the first thing she'd ask is highlight lines or sections that you feel are important to the poem, just off of feeling, right? You do that, and the next question is, what are those, in maybe a word or two, what feelings or, thoughts or concepts are those lines or sections communicating? Name them off. Sorrow, hope, or that back to forth in that order, whatever. And it's like, okay, what words communicate that to you, or what phrasings communicate that to you? That, and that. Why? And at a certain point, the focus starts to shift from the external to the internal, and you understand that you're putting stuff on those words, and you understand that connotations come from what you've experienced, what you've seen, and what you know. And you start to piece something together when you start to break down your first impressions, or what is it being evoked by something outside of you. You start to understand, what it is that's being evoked. So I take that into all my writing now. It's a large part of my memoir. It's a large part of my work on acrosstheculture.com. Seeing something happen, a celebrity wilding out, something our president says, a friend disagreeing with me on a certain point, and then me feeling a certain way, and then just like understanding where the feeling comes from before trying to correct what's outside of me. I feel like a lot of people, when the world doesn't agree with something they previously thought, put the external thing in a place where it makes sense for them, rather than trying to understand its actual nature, or what it is about that thing that makes you feel a certain way. And then, when you think about that, it's like, okay, that means, let me backtrack here. When you get back to me and my identity, I think, when you have a black person a black man, a black boy that doesn't want to associate with me for a certain thing or certain reason, about how I carry myself, how I talk, who else I hang out with, I started to see that people would section me off in a certain way, as whitewashed, as African, as not African enough if you're a relative of mine, or another first gen African kid that doesn't agree with how I move about the world, versus trying to understand, what it is about me that has gotten me there, or understanding what it is about your understanding of African or American that makes you feel a way about how I am. I'm really big on just allowing things to exist as they are, and trying to understand that truth instead of trying to fit it in a certain way. So Across the Culture is a pop culture op-ed website. My writers and I take, trending news, fascinations, personal fascinations, and, just anything in the arena of what is happening or what is defining humanity and society right now, and talk about why it means what it means to people. And I try to challenge people to accept something as is, versus put a slant or something convenient for your understanding onto a story. You can reach that website at acrosstheculture.com. Otherwise, I'm real responsive on Twitter. You can @ me. I ain't changed it since 2011. Zander Tsadwa. So it's just my first name, Zander, and then Sagwa, like the Siamese cat. Yeah, you can like Across the Culture at just Across the Culture on Facebook, and then Across the Culture DA on Twitter. And like a good names to choose from. Yeah, you can also order Facing a Bottle of Henny on Amazon. Search Facing a Bottle of Henny. College Coming of Age Tale on Amazon.com. I should have some speaking engagements lined up in the near future. And then also look for a double project I got coming out later this month. Hopefully by the time this video drop, 13 Months of Sunshine. So zooming in on sort of the self-determination and the identity talk that I say exists in Facing a Bottle of Henny, but just broadening that, just talking about how young people, and then I really want youth of color to get something out of it, but just like emerging adults, understanding who they are, finding a sense of purpose in that, and staying optimistic along that sometimes long but ultimately rewarding journey. 13 Months of Sunshine is going to be a book, so it's going to discuss that. And on the back it's going to have lyric annotations for the 13 Months of Sunshine album.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, Abby Cherinet, and I are going to be recording, have recorded and are going to be putting out a collection of 8 songs to essentially soundtrack the book. The music itself will at times have very obvious references to the book's content. Again, a lot of it about self-determination, making the most out of your present situation, and finding purpose and value in all of your experiences, especially out of your failures. A lot of the songs will be about that. Otherwise, real upbeat, light, fast, engaging tempos and melodies. But yeah, that's what's coming up for me. And yeah, I mean, I hope to invite more people into this conversation I'm having. I can never find enough time to really get all of it out, but I really appreciate Visceral Change and Sherrod over here to, giving me the time.
Appreciate you, baby. Thanks for coming to the shop.
Yeah, I appreciate it, bro. It's the chopping block coming through.